Good afternoon, everybody present here. I welcome you all to this 2 day international seminar on Islamic feminism. And our first session, technical session one, is Feminist Epistemologies and the Politics of Knowledge Production in Islam. I am Preeti Maurya, a PhD scholar at SNCWS Jamia Millia Islamia. At first, I would like to brief you all on how we have to present and what are the details for it. So each participant will get 7 minutes to present, and at the end of all the presentations we will have a Q&A, and I request all the participants to write their questions in the chat box so that we can compile it all together and ask questions to the presenters. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce our chairperson, Professor Vijay Lakshmi Brara. Professor Vijay Lakshmi Brara is a professor at Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. Professor Brara is recognized for her extensive research and writing on gender, culture, and development in Northeast India. We welcome you, ma'am, and I now give the dais to you. Ma'am, you are muted.
Ah, okay, I was not being allowed to unmute myself. That's why the delay. Welcome all of you with wholeheartedness. And right now, I will not, talk and waste more time. I will like all of you to go ahead with your presentations, and probably at the end of it, I will give my comments before we start the questions to the other people. Yeah, go on.
So our first presenter is Dr. Sana Aziz, who is an assistant professor at Aligarh Muslim University. Her topic is Reclaiming Voices and Agencies, Feminist Intervention and Islamic Epistemologies in West Asia. Professor Sana, over to you. Sorry, Dr. Sana, over to you.
Please unmute. Sana, please unmute.
Yeah. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, so the topic for my presentation today is reclaiming voice and agency, feminist interventions and Islamic epistemologies in West Asia. This paper looks at how Muslim women have been negotiating through stringent cultural and religious norms in West Asian social life, and how they have been carving out autonomous space in different fields. Exploring a range of scholars and activists from Anbara Salam Khalidi to Tawakkal Karman. This paper argues that Muslim feminists in the Arab world have made significant interventions to configure the intellectual and epistemological narratives in the region of West Asia. From literary activities to justice-based resistances, West Asian Muslim feminists continue to persuade their right to be heard and represented through their achievements And often it has been observed that their achievements often get overlooked in the larger popular imaginations around Islam and Muslim societies. Similarly, these feminists have also questioned the savior syndrome of the West, which often uses gender violence as one of the reasons for military interventions in the region. Um, this paper argues that the gendered, social, and political situations in West Asia have undergone tremendous transformations in the last 50 years due to everyday interventions, maybe pietistic and non-pietistic, of Arab feminists. It looks at how the state of Arab feminist politics can be understood in the larger context of global Islamophobia and the secular discourse in post-Arab Spring West Asia. In this sense, this paper aligns with the post-colonial feminist concerns that critiques the homogenization of third world women as passive victims needing rescue. West Asian feminists, through their intellectual and political work, subvert precisely this trope. And they insist on an indigenous epistemology of gender justice grounded in local histories and Islamic knowledge systems. Since we have very less time, so I'll very briefly focus on the historical context of how feminism arose in West Asia. And these trends are more than a century old. There have been two major trends referred to as secular feminism and Islamic feminism in West Asia. The foundation of secular feminism can be traced back to the late 19th century, while the emergence of Islamic feminism became very evident in the late 20th century. And these two trends of feminisms emerged in Muslim majority societies with plural religions and multiple ethnicities. Secular feminism is constituted by multiple discourses, including secular nationalist, Islamic modernist, human rights, and democratic principles. However, Islamic feminism uses the expression of religious discourse by making Quran and Hadith literature as their central text. Um, when the first currents of secular feminism arose in West Asia in the late 19th century, these countries were confronting Western imperialism and colonialism. For example, Tanzimat reforms in Turkey or the constitutional movements in early 20th century Iran. Um, these kind of movements generated a broad movement of Arab intellectual and cultural revival. The discourse on national liberation called for the creation of independent countries. It was within this historical context that urban women of middle and upper strata of various regions of West Asia began to generate feminist discourse. The rise of secular feminism during this period and in this region was facilitated by two phenomena. The spread of new information technology, of course, in the form of printing press, and the spread of literacy among women. One point that I want to insist here is that women anchored their feminist discourse firmly within the discourse of religious reform one, and how they coupled it with new nationalist discourse. Basically, what they wanted was their own liberation coupled with the liberation of the nation. And this is a trend that we have also witnessed in the case of reform and feminist movements in India during the freedom struggle. This, in the words of Margot Badran, can also be termed as feminism in a nationalist century. Then, coming to the discourse of Islamic feminism in West Asia, which emerged by the 1990s, um, it also, several factors actually facilitated the growth of Islamic feminism. One, women were now um, more troubled by the conservative and the male-oriented reading of the Quran by the new Islamist orders. And by the later decades of the 20th century, education had also reached more women across all classes, percolating up to even the rural classes. In fact, in some parts of West Asia, women were also gaining access to highest levels in the religious sciences and hence were competent to undertake a fresh reading of the literature, religious literature, and speak for themselves. Uh, and they wanted to shape their own discourse through their own experiences as being women. And it was in this context that we see women were revisioning a new feminism through their fresh understanding, reading, interpretation of the Quran. Um,
Please conclude, Dr. Aziz. It's been 6 minutes.
okay, then because I'm really running out of time, so I'll be kind of skipping a major portion of the paper. The second section of this paper deals with few actors of Arab feminism, and how I'll just name a few. Otherwise, in the paper, I've dealt in detail with how their contributions and scholarships have contributed to the rise of feminism in West Asia. Nabawiya Musa, for example, Lebanese Nazira Zainuddin, Fatima Marnisi through her book, and how they have actually contributed to the feminist reading, understanding, and uh, interpretation of the Quran and Hadith literature. Then the last section of this paper deals with the Arab Spring and the contribution of Tawakkal Karman. And okay, fine, I'll be concluding. So basically, what my basic argument of this paper is that feminist interventions in West Asia basically exemplify powerful reconfiguration of both knowledge and power. West Asian feminists have not merely imported feminist ideas but have produced Islamic epistemologies of gender rooted in their own interpretative traditions. They demonstrate that feminism is not a Western export, but a living, evolving discourse embedded in diverse cultural and religious contexts. And in the light of post colonial feminist theory, Islamic epistemology, and intersectional analysis, West Asian feminisms must be recognized as decolonial projects that reclaim both voice and agency. Their practices unsettle the binaries of modern, traditional, secular, religious, Western, non Western, and situating feminist agency in lived realities of faith, community, and struggle. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sana. I request you to mute yourself. Um, our next speaker is Dr. Pinky Isha, who is assistant professor at Rabindra Bharati University. Her topic is gender equality in Islam, the ethical dimension of Islamic feminism. Dr. Pinky Isha, your time starts now.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the topic of my paper is how Islamic is the concept of Islamic feminism and afterthought. That was the topic.
I
So I think,
apologize.
yeah, I think there's some, miscommunication regarding the topic. But anyways, I start my paper. The discourse of Islamic feminism occupies a complex, transformative space at the intersection of faith, gender, law, and culture. At its heart lies the conviction that the ethical impulse of the Quran and Prophet Muhammad Wasallam's legacy offers a vision of justice and human dignity that transcends the patriarchal formulations which many Muslim societies inherited. In this light, scholars such as Amina Wadud, Leela Ahmad, Mai Yamani, Asra Nomani, and Yvonne Yazbek Haddad have each contributed distinctive but interlocking voices to a movement of reinterpretation and reform. And yet the field remains contested. Critiques from both within the Muslim world and from secular feminist quarters expose the tensions involved in claiming both fidelity to Islam and allegiance to feminist equality. Amina Wadud emerges as a seminal figure in this endeavor. Her reading of the Quran in Quran and Women, rereading the sacred text from a woman's perspective, 1992, and subsequent writings emphasize that much of classical Quranic exegesis has been shaped by male centric perspectives and thus fails to engage fully with women's lived experiences. For Vadut, the key to attend both to the text and the context to recognize that the Holy Quran itself does not privilege one gender over another in spiritual worth, but that the interpretive tradition often has. As she states in an interview, I do not make a feminist interpretation of the Quran, but rather an inclusive reading of it. Her activism of leading a mixed gender Friday prayer symbolizes her belief that women's leadership in Muslim worship is not only possible but theologically coherent. However, critics suggest that by anchoring her reform in Western notions of gender equality, she risks importing external paradigms into Islam rather than developing an indigenous one. Some more conservative voices argue that her stance privileges feminism at the expense of a Muslim epistemology. Leela Ahmed's contribution is more historically grounded in women and gender in Islam, Historical Roots of a Modern Debate, 1992. He traces how the early egalitarian ethos of the Holy Quran and early Muslim community gradually gave way through the Abbasid era. The incorporation of non Arab traditions, the institutionalization of jurisprudence to gender systems that privileged male authority. Ahmed argues that one must separate the ethical structure of Islam, which envisages moral equality, from the hierarchical structure of gender relations that became dominant in many Muslim societies. Thus, her methodology places the meaning of gender in Islam in historical and cultural context rather than treating it as timeless. From her vantage point, the task of Islamic feminism is not simply to reform contemporary laws, but to re examine which interpretations of gender were historically contingent and which might be universal. She thereby opens space for Muslim women to claim authority not in praxis but in real life and scholarship. In the Arab context, Mai Yamani's edited volume, Feminism and Islam, Legal and Literary Perspectives, 1996, offers a further dimension, the legal, literary, and social reality of women in Islamic societies. Her collection of essays spans Iran, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and Egypt and takes seriously how family law, criminal justice, honor codes, entrepreneurship, and gender construction operate under Sharia and custom. Yamani's vantage underscores that Islamic feminism is as much about reforming social legal structures as it is about evolution in thought. By situating women's efforts within the legal and literary culture of the Arab Muslim world, she highlights that change must engage the institutions, courts, family law, religious schools, not just the interpretive text. In doing so, she implicitly challenges the assumption that reinterpretation alone suffices without addressing the structural mechanisms of gendered power. Yuval Yazbek Haddad brings the sociological lens in Islam, Gender and Social Change, 1997, which she co-edited. Here she explores how migration, labor, state ideology, and globalization shape Muslim women's identities and opportunities. Though it's not always framed explicitly as Islamic feminist in her language, her work provides, in crucial context, the gendered relations in Muslim societies which are mediated by political economy, colonial legacies, state policies, and diaspora dynamics. Her scholarship reminds us that the modesty of a headscarf or the form of legal reform often has less to do with theology and more to do with class, geopolitics, migration, and modernity. Thus, a full account of Islamic feminism must engage these forces too. Asra Nomani represents the activist, community-based edge of the movement. Her memoir, Standing Alone, An American Women's Struggle for the Soul of Islam, 2006, in which she recounts how within the U.S. Muslim communities, women have campaigned for equal access to mosques, transparency of mosque governance, and reinterpretation of religious practice. Nomani demonstrates that Islamic feminism is lived. It is not only theology in books, but prayer spaces, mosque boards, and the everyday struggles of Muslim women. Her approach may lean closer to liberalist reform, yet she insists it remains faithful to the spirit of Islam as a source of justice. Taken together, these voices illuminate both the promise and the difficulty of Islamic feminism. On the one hand, they affirm that Islam is not simply a constraint on women, but contains within its texts an ethical vision, possibilities for equality, agency, and reinterpretation. On the other, they reveal how deeply patriarchy, historical accretion, and cultural power are woven into the fabric of Muslim societies and institutions. Islamic feminism thus grapples with layered challenges, renewing dominant interpretive traditions, transforming institutions, attending to lived realities of women, and negotiating the boundaries between secular feminism and faith-based reform. But the movement is not without robust critiques. Some scholars argue that the label Islamic feminism is intrinsically contradictory, that feminism as a secular ideology cannot be fully reconciled with the Islamic notion of deen, which is premised on divine rather than human origin. Others caution that focusing on reinterpretation of sacred texts may involve...
To conclude.
I will just wind up. Yes, others caution that focusing on reinterpretation of sacred texts may undervalue structural reforms, economic redistribution, or political reforms, which are central to women's empowerment worldwide. There is also the charge that Islamic feminism, by seeking to retain patriarchal structures of authority, while seeking reform may be limited in its ambitions. Meanwhile, from a secular feminist view, there is this concern that anchoring feminism in a religious tradition may reproduce essentialist tropes. The Muslim women as the emblem of the oppressed or resilient rather than open the category of women to full agency beyond religious identity. I conclude with a single line. What emerges is a plural and evolving field rather than a unified movement. Theologies, hermeneutics, and activism vary widely across geographies. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, and thank you once more, the organizers, for giving me this platform to present my paper. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Isha, for your paper and for your presentation and for keeping in time. Our next speaker is Muhammad Asif Sheikh, who is a research scholar at Jangirpur College. His topic is Gender Equality in Islam, the Ethical Dimension of Islamic Feminism. Muhammad Asif,
Yeah, I'm audible.
if you could, yes, thank you. Yeah, your
Good
time
afternoon.
starts now. Yeah.
Good afternoon, respected professors, scholars, and fellow participants. Let me begin with a simple but striking question is that if Islam proclaims equality, why do so many Muslim women still experience inequality? This tension between Islam ethical promises of justice and the realities of patriarchy is not merely academic, it is lived day by millions of believers. And we hear debates about women rights, veiling, and leadership, and even voices in public space, and often the religion is blamed. But the real question is not whether Islam oppresses women or not, but actually it is whether we have lost the sight of ethical Islam intended. That questions lies at my heart of my research paper is that title, The Gender Equality in Islam, the Ethical Dimensions of Islamic Feminism. Thus, my central research question is, how can the ethical dimensions of Islamic feminism restore the Islam moral core and the bridge the gap between the scriptures and the social reality? So the next section is that the study builds on a rich body of scholarship. Let's briefly trace its evolution. Early scholarship notable by Lila Ahmad and Fatima Manesis, who challenged the patriarchal interpretations that dominated Islamic discourse. Ahmad, who wrote a book, is Woman and Gender in Islam in 1992, and Manesis, The Veil and the Male Elite, in 1987, exposed how the political and cultural forces, not divine will, shape the gender hierarchies. This scholars distinguish between the divine injections and the cultural practice, reminding us that inequality often stems from the human base, not sacred text. Then come the pioneering works, Amina Wadud and Asma Ballas. Wadud, Quran and Woman in 1992 introduced a gender inclusive hermeneutic, asserting that the Quran itself envisions equality. Ballas in Believing Woman in Islam 2002 argued that the patriarchy is not inherent to revelation, but a product of interpretive history. Yet the research gap remains clear. While many studies examine law and theology, few systematically analyzes Islamic feminism through an ethical lens and a moral framework for equality. And this is my research paper is that. And the next section is that the concept of gender equality in Islam. Moving to the Quranic foundation, the Quran is repeatedly asserted that both man and woman are equal in moral responsibility and spiritual capacity, as stated in Surah Al-Hujra. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you. These verses define equality not by gender, lineage, or status, but by taqwa, moral consequences. We understand through the reasoning senses that man and woman are partners, not rivals in moral accountability. The Prophet Muhammad's own action affirmed this. He evaluated women's role through education, economic independence, and spiritual authority. Like Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anhu symbolized leadership and faith. And the Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anhu represent intellectual scholarship and jurisprudence. It is proved through the reasoning. In terms of the ethical insight is that true equality in Islam means not sameness of role, but the moral accountability to God. And the next section is that understanding the Islamic feminism. The Islamic feminism is often misunderstood. It is not a rebellion against the Islam, but a revival of Islamic ethical consequences. It combines with the Quran principle of justice, in Arabic term al-adl, compassion, in also in Arabic term al-rahma, and dignity, al-karama, with the emancipatory aims of feminism. And it also functions as a reform movement in a law education activism. For instance, Mr. Husseini reformist jurisprudence integrates the feminist ethics into fiqh. And Saba Mahmood, a political of pity, shows the woman pity itself can be from agencies. In short, Islamic feminism transformed feminism from a secular struggle into the sacred pursuit of justice, a return to Islamic ethical essence. And the next section is that ethical dimension of gender equality. This section forms the heart of my argument that the Quran is moral vision integrates law and ethics, making justice a spiritual obligation. As stated Al-Surah Al-Ahzab, for believing man and believing woman, God has prepared forgiveness and a great reward. Here, the equality begins with the soul before it's appeared in society. Ethics precedes law. Reasoningly, moral equality arises from humanity, shared accountability before God. Therefore, the pursuit of gender justice become an act of worship. Ethics, then, it is not abstract theory, it is shaped everyday conduct. Keynes Act is that without ethical transformation, legal reform remain superficial. Equality must begin with the moral consequences, then extended into the institutions. Thus, Islamic feminism ethical lens redefines equality as a moral integrity, not imitations of waste, but fidelity to divine justice. So my last section is that research findings and implications. From this analysis, several case finding emerged here. The firstly, the interpretations of Qurans is essential for realizing gender justice. And
You
second
have a
is that
minute to
equality
conclude,
in
Asif.
and lastly, I would like to say that to conclude this, we must believe that the ethical dimension of Islamic feminism in both a restorative and reformative force is restored Islam, the moral integrity by the centering faith and around justice, and the reform society by linking beliefs with ethical actions. And Allah Ta'ala subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Holy Quran like this, I will not let the deeds of any among you, male or female, go to waste. You are one of one another. These verses summarize the visions of my research. Gender equality in Islam is not imitations, it is integrity. It is not a rebellion, it is return. Return to the ethical spirit that always lay at the heart of revelation. Thank you. Thank you all of. I conclude here.
Thank you, Asif. I now hand over to my co-rapporteur, Sajid, to take the session forward.
Okay.
Mariam. So our next presenter is Ikra Sultan, who is a research scholar, Jamia Hamdard University. Her topic is Reclaiming Epistemic Authority, Feminist Hermeneutics from the Prophet's Household to Contemporary Islamic Thought. Ikra,
A very
unmute
good
yourself.
afternoon, everyone. I have made a presentation and I would like to present through it, so I'm sharing it. Give me a minute. So, my topic is reclaiming epistemic authority. So, the research examines epistemic authority in Islam, meaning the power to interpret and define religious knowledge. The central argument is that women were present and influential in the formation of Islamic knowledge from the earliest period, particularly within the Prophet's household. However, over time, interpretive authority became monopolized by patriarchal institutions, resulting in the erasure of women as legitimate interpreters. The contemporary feminist hermeneutical movement is therefore not a rejection of Islamic tradition, but a return to its foundational intellectual pluralism. Islamic feminism is understood here as a faith-grounded interpretive movement, not a secular critique of religion. It is rooted in Tawheed, which means the indivisible unity of God, the oneness, which implies that no human being can claim divine-like authority, including men over women or women over men. Adl, justice, which demands equity in social and spiritual life. From this perspective, gender hierarchy is not divine mandate but a historical distortion of revelation. Thus, Islamic feminism is both spiritual and intellectual. The question of authority. Every religious tradition must answer who has the right to interpret revelation. In early Islam, women were active participants in transmitting, debating, and contextualizing knowledge. Their interpretive authority was recognized and uncontroversial. However, as Islamic jurisprudence became institutionalized, interpretation shifted from shared community knowledge to hierarchical scholarly authority. This shift produced the illusion that interpretive authority is inherently male, an illusion that the modern movement seeks to dismantle. The theological lens. Firstly, textual hermeneutics, rereading the Quran and Hadith with attention to linguistic context, ethical coherence, and theological unity. Secondly, its historical reconstruction, recovering the intellectual agency of early Muslim women whose roles were diminished or erased in later historiography. Thirdly, decolonial critique, recognizing that Western feminist frameworks are not universally applicable, but that Islamic feminism must be grounded in Islamic epistemology, not Western secular norms. This methodology ensures that feminist interpretation emerges from within the tradition, not imposed upon it. The Prophet's household provides direct evidence of women's central role in religion's reasoning. Firstly, Khadija bint Khuwailid, a moral authority, intellectual validator of revelation. She demonstrated that the first act of faith in Islam came through a woman's discretion and conviction. Secondly, Aisha bint Abi Bakr, who was a legal theorist, a transmitter of hadith, a jurist. Her corrections of companions show women were authoritative in legal reasoning. Fatima al-Zahra, ethical and political interpreter of justice. Her sermon articulates early Islamic moral philosophy. Salama, dialogical part, dialogical participant in revelation. Her question directly shaped Quranic articulation of gendered equality. This demonstrates that interpretive agency is embedded in Islam's foundational memory. The patriarchal erasures. The marginalization of women in Islamic knowledge was not divinely sanctioned. It was historical. It was a historical process shaped by the institutionalization of fiqh, which restricted scholarship to male spaces. Political manipulation of hadith, as shown by Fatima Barnisi, where narrations serving male authority were canonized, while those affirming women's agency were sidelined. Colonial rhetoric, which framed the Muslim woman as a symbol of backwardness, prompting defensive patriarchal entrenchment among Muslim men. Thus, patriarchy in Islam interpretation is a product of politics and revelation, not revelation. Contemporary feminist hermeneutics. Modern scholars reopen interpretive spaces by restoring ethical coherence and theological consistency to how to read Quran. Like Amina Wadud, and her contribution of Tafsir al-Tawhidi reads the Quran holistically so no verse contradicts divine justice. Asma Barlas, on reading patriarchy. It distinguishes between the Quran and patriarchal interpretation imposed upon it. Fatima Marnis, she was a historical critique, exposes political motivation behind certain exclusionary hadiths, like one hadith that a nation led by women is bound to be doomed. Saba Mahmood, agency through piety, expands agency beyond resistance, allowing the empowerment through devotion and not westernization. Together, they reopen ijtihad as a living intellectual practice. And now the digital ijtihad, the era of digital ijtihad, unlike previous eras where interpretive authority was bounded by institution and geography, digital platforms allow decentralization access to religious scholarships, formation of transnational feminist interpretive communities, the insertion of marginalized voices into religious discourse. However, digital spaces also introduce a need for rigorous knowledge literacy so that the democratization does not become the dilution. Now, the decolonial theological reclamation. Islamic feminist hermeneutics resist both the Western secular assumption that religious must be discarded for liberation, which is basically the westernization of Islam. Secondly, the internal patriarchal claim that men are the natural custodians of religious meaning. Instead, it reframes liberation as the freedom to approach God without mediating hierarchies. This is not a feminist takeover of Islam, but Islam's own liberation logic reasserted. The theological balance. Firstly, the three Quranic principles guide the restoration. Firstly, Tawheed, which is establishes a divine unity. The outcome would be no human hierarchy is absolute. Adl, which means justice, establishes moral justice. Women cannot be denied interpretive
You have
authority.
a minute to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm just doing that. Rehma establishes compassion as divine ethic. Knowledge must be elevated through dignity, not degraded. Islamic feminism restores the moral grammar of revelation. Now to the conclusion. Feminist hermeneutics within Islam it's a historical continuity, not innovation, a theological necessity, not rebellion, a restoration of ethical integrity, not Western influence. It returns Islam to the interpretive landscape of its earliest community, where authority belongs to piety, intellect, and sincerity, and not gender. That's that from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikra, for your presentation. Now, our next presenter is Mehdi Ehsan, a scholar, Darul Huda Islamic University, and his topic is Reclaiming Quranic Authority, Amina Wadud's Feminist Hermeneutics and Decolonial Future of Islamic Knowledge.
The, am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Just I'm sharing my PPT.
I request all the presenters also to turn on their videos so that the session becomes more interactive.
Um, Start. Can I start?
Yes, please, your time starts now.
Uh,
Please put on your
oh,
video. So,
I turned my video. Okay.
okay.
So my topic is that reclaiming Quranic authority. I mean, now do this feminist hermeneutics and decolonial futures of Islamic knowledge. So this study examines how Amina Odudu's feminist reconfigures Quranic interpretation as an inclusive and justice-oriented practices, challenging patriarchal and colonial dominance in Islamic knowledge production. So in my abstract, the problem is that Quranic authority is dominated by patriarchal interpretation and colonial knowledge, excluding women's interpretive. Do this solution there. Her feminist uses linguistic accuracy, contextual historization, and maqasid centers ethics to recover interpretive validity for secondary voice. And there have a methodology, a hybrid approach integrate into textual analysis of Odudi's works with critical exploration of digital feminist counter publics independent of interviews or ethnography. This approach reveals feminist interpretation as an epistemological route to decolonial futures influencing curricular reform, family law, and digital paradigm. And next slide is the crisis of Quranic interpretation, a double barrel crisis of
authority. Quranic interpretation has been traditionally dominated by a sole male scholarly elite, ulama, whose methods, tafsir, normalize patriarchal social legal frameworks. It has profoundly patriarchal in its systematic exclusion of hubs dependence on frozen and then according to the reference Ahmad Leila Oman and gender in Islam historical roots of a modern debate University Press. The systematic hegemony ignores the lived experience of Muslim women and the moral needs of a post-colonial world. And next slide is although this feminist have a decolonial pathway, how what is the in future decolonial pathway will be. The Dr. Amina Odu's methodology is a potential intellectual and politics as inclusive and justice aim. Firstly, linguistic prescience, systematic tracing of gender neutral terms like nafs, soul to challenge gender assumptions, and then contextual historization, distinguishing between internal principles and temporal application to disrupt inherited ranking. And then Maqasid Center ethics, prioritizing the higher goals of the law, Maqasid al-Sharia, and the ethical demand for justice, Adal. And the next slide is the institutional dismissal. Why traditionalist object
Mehdi, we can't hear you. Mehdi, we can't hear you. You're muted yourself. Mehdi, you
sorry for network issue, I can't.
Mehdi, it's all right.
Mehdi,
Sorry,
why don't you
no,
just
for
speak because your time is over?
yeah.
Just give a conclusion.
Okay, I'm going to conclusion now.
Hmm.
So, white administrative object that transgress usul al-fiqh. Her method is criticized for overlooking the settled order of sources and approaches adopted for exegesis and jurisprudence. And rereadings violate the consequence of the peer predecessor self, which is considered a binding source in Sunni traditions. So, in conclusion, final synthesis, although this is pivotal role and ongoing context, theological, although this uses a Tawhidic paradigm to establish absolute spiritual and moral equality. Her interpretation of Al-Qawamun in the verses of Quran as a conditional and functional and reception responsibility directly challenges centuries of patriarchal tafsir. He work successfully shifts the academic discourse from male authority to Quranic ethics of text, adult justice in gender relations. But if we see the traditional critic, traditional Sunni scholars and scholarships deems her position theologically and juristically, arguing her methodology divided from established principle of usul al-fiqh and ijma consensus, risking interpretive fidelity for contemporary ethical concerns. Ultimately, Odud demonstrate that the quest for gender equality can be anchored entirely within a progressive Islamic framework, making her vision centered to the future of the Muslim Ummah and the reimagining of Islamic knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehdi Hassan, for your presentation. So now we are moving for the last presenter, Yashvi Sadika Zaidi and Umarat Firdos, research scholar, Jamia Millia Islamia, and these topic are Beyond the Text, Feminist Hermeneutics of the Quran and the Question of Reception in Muslim Societies. Kindly unmute yourself.
Hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I will start. So, me and my colleague, we are presenting a paper which is titled as Beyond the Text, Feminist Hermeneutics of Quran and the Question of Perception in Muslim Societies. So I would like to start with what brought this project together. When we go back and look at the last few decades, there have been a growing number of Muslim women scholars, as already talked about. There is Amina Wadood and Asma Barris. So these scholars have revisited the Quran and they ask a very important question, and that is, what if the problem isn't the text, but how it has been read? So they basically argue that these verses were often cited to justify gender hierarchies, which basically can be understood very differently when we go through them and read the Quran in their own moral vocabulary. Like we talked about the Adl, the Rahma, and the human dignity. So this kind of approach is called as the feminist tafsir or the feminist hermeneutics. Now, if we look at these readings, they basically are not trying to replace the religion with the modern values, but what rather they are doing is actually work kind of within the Quran and insisting that these ethical codes already point towards equality. So, feminist tafsir is both a faith-based project and a political. That means it kind of go back and reclaim the text, and also at the very same time it's challenge its unequal power relations that are built around it. So basically, the issue that we explore in this paper is that through these feminist interpretations that have been growing very much immensely in scholarship as well as activism, but they kind of are still very limited in mainstream religious spaces. For example, in mosques, in madrasas, in state legal systems. So we kind of ask very basic two questions. That is, that why is this gap between production of feminist tafsir and its reception in the society, and what would it take to kind of bridge that gap between? So we basically draw upon cases in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, also from Malaysia and Indonesia. So before moving to the text itself, we kind of go back to see what sort of theoretical lens we have used. We combine together the decolonial feminist theory and Miranda Ficker's concept of epistemic injustice. Decolonial feminism, it helps us see how knowledge in Muslim societies is shaped by colonial legacies and global hierarchies, which basically ask us who gets to interpret, like whose voice count as to be as very authentic. And also the epistemic injustice, on the other hand, looks into how these certain voices, which obviously are women often, they are not believed, they're not given the interpretative tools to express their experiences, which goes back into hermeneutical injustice and testimonial injustice. But I will not go deeper into that. So putting these two together, we show that the barriers that feminist tafsir faces is not just theology; it's kind of structural. Authority where religious interpretations has always been institutional. The madrasas, we talked about everything, state systems, and they kind of decide what is official. So if the space remains closer to the women scholars, so no amount of what sort of good scholarship they do, they never reach to the ground. So looking at the literature, we draw upon the ideas of Amina Wadood in his book Quran and Women. She goes back and re-examines the verses about men and women, and also Asma Barris in book Believing Women in Islam. She takes the argument further and sees how these undermine the patriarchal readings are there. And also we Cassia Ali in his book Sexual Ethics. So these are the kind of literature we draw from. So if we draw these all together, these emphasize through three important things. That is the context, the linguistic precision, and the moral coherence. So they kind of don't reject the Quran; they kind of try to reclaim it. Uh, we There are a lot other things, but I think they were already discussed, so I'm going to skip that. So I'll give it back to Yashvi. She kind of will continue it further. Thank you so much.
So,
Hello, everyone. The next part of our paper looks at what we call the reception gap. Basically, it means the distance between how feminist scholars interpret the Quran and how those interpretations are actually received by religious institutions and ordinary people. Now, you might think if feminist tafsir is so strong, so rooted in the Quran, then why does it still face so much resistance, right? Well, it's not because the interpretations are weak. It's really about power, it's about access and perceptions. See, in most Muslim societies, interpretations of the Quran is still controlled by men through madrasas, mosques, religious boards. So when women come forward with new readings, it often shakes the system a little. Reform is immediately seen as a threat, even though these interpretations come from Quranic principles like justice and equality. Another issue is how people see feminist tafsir. Many times it's dismissed as Western or foreign, even when it's completely Islamic. And that label, Western label, makes people defensive. For example, if you see in Bangladesh, when reforms were proposed for women's rights, people protested, saying that it was an anti Islamic thing. So, that fear of losing identity makes it easy to reject anything new. Then there's the problem of access. Most feminist scholarship stays in universities or English books, while the average person learns through
Centers, you have a
learn
minute to
the religion
conclude.
through sermons or madrasas. Spaces that really include these new interpretations. So these ideas exist, but they don't really reach the people who need to hear them. Now, social media has helped a bit. It's given feminist scholars a platform, but it's also a double-edged sword because they get trolled, they get misquoted, they get attacked. Still, it's slowly building small or supportive communities, especially among young Muslims who are more open-minded. When we look at South Asia, it's a mixed picture. There are NGOs and women's groups trying hard to bring feminist tafsir to the ground level through workshops, through small study circles, through translations. But madrasas still rely heavily on classical commentaries, and political leaders are scared of being seen as anti-Islamic. So the result is uneven. Some urban areas are receptive, but rural
Yes,
areas
kindly
not
conclude.
much. Okay. I'll just wrap it up. Did you say something? So I'm wrapping it up. Feminist hermeneutics isn't weak or un-Islamic. It's just unheard. The challenge is not about faith. It's about who gets to speak for faith. The goal now is to make the Quran message of equality, compassion, and justice a part of people's daily religious life, and not just something written in academic books, but something that is lived, felt, and practiced. So, yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Yashvi and Umara, for your presentation. Now we are open to the question answer session, and over to you, Preeti.
Thank you, Sajid. As I can see, there's one question, and I think it is addressed to our last speaker, Umarat and Yashvi. The question is, I want to ask about interpretive
Preeti, can I just
fidelity.
give some words before they start the questions?
Oh,
Can
yeah.
I just say
I'm
something?
sorry, ma'am.
Okay, no, I won't be very short. Don't worry, I won't give a lecture. But two, three things, I am very enamored by the fact, there are two, three things which are common in majority of the papers. And that is, first of all, that the interpretation of Islam, hermeneutics, as you say, that has prevailed in most of the papers. Second is that we want to bring in the concept of Islamophobia by the Westerns and the survivor and victimhood of Muslim women. That is another thing. And Yashvi, you brought out a very important image of, saying that there's always a fear of losing identity. So that is a very, very important statement to take back home. I feel because, I have not seen, not only in Islam, but anywhere, any small indigenous communities, minorities, This whole fear of losing identity vis-a-vis the Western or secular ideals is so much prevalent. You will be surprised to know it will be so much prevalent even in Nagaland, among the Naga Mothers Association. When they try to do something, you are being like Indian. This is the ekdam comment. Don't be like Indian. You are a Naga. The identity prevails more than gender dynamics. So I'm very happy that all of you brought out this wonderful various facets and epistemologies vis-a-vis Islamic feminism, and I really appreciate, and especially the young minds. I could see the wave of openness, of critiquing, of being heard. You need to be heard. That's what it's not un-Islamic what you're saying, but we are not heard. They are unheard. So that unheard should be heard. And with that, now I open the platform for questions.
We also have our co-chair, Dr. Shaika Tanziki. She is an assistant professor at JNU in the Department of English and is a scholar of Islamic feminism. I invite you, ma'am, to please present your remarks.
So, hello everyone. Am I audible?
We can see you.
Yeah, sure. The session was wonderful, and as ma'am rightly pointed out, and I would just like to comment on Yashvi's uh, argument that despite the amount of work that has been done, especially in the decades of the 1990s when Amina Wadud was profusely writing and speaking about Islamic feminism, the resistance that we see on ground is immense. And one very potent reason for that may obviously be this fear of losing identity. But there is also, with everyone who works with Islamic feminism and the people who have been doing stuff related to Islamic feminism, we have seen a sort of tug of war between the two sides. So there is a secular side of feminism which says that Islamic feminism is rather an oxymoron. There cannot be any feminism with Islam being at the center. And also from the religious front, we are thrown upon, bombarded, I would say, with these remarks and with these comments that if you are a feminist and if you follow the dictats or the arguments of secular feminism, then basically you are not a proper Muslim. So this not only I do see this resistance not only by the people who are practicing Islam and who want to live in a world which is more equitable. This problem is very much felt and experienced by the people who do Islamic feminism, especially if they are also Muslims, because then they are dealing with a sort of a fault line which we are trying to fill in, but we are seeing and we are bombarded with these resistant and sometimes very not so very pleasing remarks. So I am very glad that this conference could take place, and I'm also very glad to see that there are some very important contributions made by Muslim women themselves, because I have been seeing that though we are working on this working in this field and on this topic for a while now, the grassroots level changes that we hope to see are yet not visible, especially in terms of, like, I would just give a very brief example of the meher, the case of the meher. So most of the presentations were right now focusing on this feminist intervention, these feminist interventions and the feminist hermeneutics and the reinterpretation and exegesis of the Quran. But we also need to see how the rights which are like absolutely there and which are not even being contradicted by the patriarchal ways of reading the Quran, the rights which are already there, which are not contradicted, which are clearly there, even those are not very easily granted. For example, the meher. it is there. No one would contradict that. Not let alone people like us, but not even a very religious Orthodox Muslim interpreter would contradict that. But what happens in reality is very 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 different. We rather emphasize more on dowry than on meher, and I have seen cases where the very question of meher is like one doesn't even know what one is getting for meher. So even the rights which are very clearly there have been obfuscated and kind of have been sidelined. So yeah, it's very important for us who are in academics to not only work on the discursive level, but also try and find ways through which we can implement these discussions, maybe back in our communities or on ground level. I have yet not been able to find a way, but I am very hopeful, and I'm sure that together we would someday be able to find something that would rather be that could rather be implemented in our families, in our communities, than be limited just to these academic discussions. Thank you so much. That is
Thank you, Dr. Shaika. As we are really running short on time and we are overstepping our time limit, I think, but we can take one question, the first question that we had, and I think it is addressed to our last paper. So the question is by Ibtisam Muhammad Abujad. She asks, how might context impact an understanding? Sorry, she wants to ask about interpretive fidelity. How might context impact an understanding of this? And she says it's open to all presenters, though, if anybody wants to take it.
Yashvi, you're mute.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Uh,
Who?
Am I audible?
yes, I'm Pinky Isha.
Yes, Pinky Isha. Pinky Isha, you can
Yes, because it was just now showing that I was not allowed to unmute, so I couldn't speak. I guess this term, fidelity to this kind of an interpretation depends on your own understanding of the Quran first, the Hadiths first, and then is the interpretation. It's not about fidelity exactly, because how do you even create a yardstick for fidelity? I mean, if you go by the interpretation, the hegemonic interpretation, then I think there's a danger. And if you go by a totally personalistic, individualistic interpretation, there also is the danger. So there has to be a fine balance. So I think the term fidelity is something which is a bit amiss. That is what I want to say. I would rather put it this way: how much we align ourselves to the basic spirit of Islam while we navigate the rights given to women, which are tremendous right from the time of the prophet and beyond, and how do we link these gaps which are there and connect them again and bring a sort of a holistic interpretation. I think that is more suitably would help in the interpretation, or at least if we do away with that term fidelity, because then it creates a problem. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we wouldn't be able to take any more questions. And on that note, we have come to the end of technical session 1. I would like to present the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I extend our deepest gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mazhar Asif, and Registrar of Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Mahtab Alam Rizvi, for their support. A very heartfelt thanks to our distinguished chair, Professor Vijayalakshmi, and our co-chair, Dr. Shaika. I also would like to thank all the participants without whom the event would not have been a success. And at last but not the least, my gratitude goes out to our entire organizing team and volunteers whose commitment and tireless efforts have ensured the seamless execution of program. Thank you, presenters. And now you can stay to attend the next session or we end the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.